please. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we will have a presentation from Kaisa Aro. She currently a doctoral student in Anto University, Finland. In this presentation, she will elaborate the relationship between language and built environment. Okay, now let me start with Kaisa.
Okay, hello everyone, I'm Kaisa Airo. I come from the Built Environment Services Research Group, and today I will talk about how language is connected to built environment, and also a little bit present my dissertation, which is about applying linguistic methods to built environment and in workplace studies in general. So, usually it's thought that language and buildings are not connected in any way, but actually they are connected in more ways than people usually understand. In this presentation, I'm gonna first present how language and built environment are connected to each other. Then I will a little bit talk about the methods I have been using in my dissertations, which are linguistic methods. And then I will tell a few results that are based on my case studies. So first of all, categorization. When you think about buildings, they are actually projects of categories. For example, hospitals, they categorize patients based on the diseases. And this is taken for granted in many times because people think that diseases are something that could be categorized, but actually diseases, like anything else, are categorized based on language. And how this is connected to buildings is, for example, in hospitals, the wards and departments are categorized based on how diseases are categorized. So how does this impact to society? Is that, for example, you can see the picture of mental patients there. For example, in the 19th century, when people were putting people to the mental institutions, it was based on how actually the mental diseases were categorized and defined. For example, at the time, beggars and prostitutes were considered mentally ill. And nowadays we don't think they are mentally ill as such, but when they were put to the hospital in the same department as, for example, schizophrenic, they kind of like became ill. So in that way, the linguistic process of categorizing is connected to buildings, and buildings actually affect the way people behave when they, for example, get sick, mentally ill, based on where they are put in the hospital. Then heritage. As you all know, these places, the below picture is from Auschwitz concentration camp, and the other picture is from London. And these places are not that different, or they don't have a meaning unless you know the story behind them. For example, concentration camps nowadays, they are just pieces of land or warehouses or just nothing really, unless you know what is the story behind it. And in that sense, as language is stories, the stories actually make a big difference on the way we are perceiving the buildings. So in that sense, heritage is a very important factor on how we perceive the built environment. Then, actually the using the spaces. This is also connected to the heritage, but it's also connected to our cultural assumptions. Everybody knows that this picture is from a lecture hall or from school. When we come to a place like this, we immediately know how to take our role within the space. If we are teachers, we go in front of the class, and if we are students, we go and sit to the tables. And this is also taken for granted, but actually it's based on the assumption we have on the place. And in this sense, even the using of the spaces is affected to the stories and cultural meaning behind it. Then, it is not just about the places, it's also how we speak about the places, or how we read and write, and how the media reports things about places. This is a Google search from open plan offices. As you can see, there is like surviving in the open plan office. Open plan offices must die. We have a very negative attitude on open plan offices. And usually when people are individuals, they tend to think that this comes from the straight experience of the place. But actually, it is also on how people talk about them. If we are all the time getting this negative feedback on the certain place, let it be open plan office or whatever building and built environment, we start to form our opinion based on what is said and what others are saying. And in that sense, the way we speak about the places and spaces is really important in the way we actually experience them. So, how is language connected to spaces? First of all, it's in the design and construct phase, how we categorize these spaces, like I told you in the beginning. It is about the heritage, what is the history behind the place, the use, and the cultural assumptions connected to the use of the places. And also the communication, how we communicate about spaces. And this has an effect on how we manage them, and the way we manage them affects to the research, and this I mean like when the research is based on the human feedback, we get a certain results on based what human people actually say about the places. And this has an effect to the design and construct. Of course, this circle might go other way around as well, because everything is connected to everything, basically. But the thing what I'm trying to say is that it's not just about the physical space, it's also the cultural construction and the language behind the places that matters. So, like I told you earlier, language is connected to places, but how can we really study this? How can we get to the real result behind these so-called cultural constructions? And I'm saying that we should apply these so-called sociolinguistic methods to study places. And sociolinguistic methods are interested on, for example, who speaks. The same literal message is different based on who is saying what. For example, if Stalin was saying these things I'm saying now, it would have totally different meaning, and it would have totally different influence that it has when I'm speaking about it. Also, in what context? Are we talking from, for example, from the employee's point of view when we are working in the office? Or are we talking from some other context, for example, at home when we are talking about spaces? It has a different kind of meaning. I'm sorry. Also, we have these cultural trends, and so about the text and trends and phrase. By this I mean these overall ideas that we have that everybody knows, for example, globalization or green things. Everybody knows that green things is about ecological stuff and this kind of thing. So the sociolinguistic methods are interested also about these overall big cultural concepts that we all know. And people tend to take them as well as self-evident. They don't notice that it's some sort of a concept that might be kind of new. For example, in 80s nobody would have talked about globalization in the same way as they do now. Also, they are interested in rhetoric strategies. By rhetoric strategies, I mean the ways we are trying to pursue one another, when we are trying to convince somebody to act in a way we want to. And usually every time people speak with each other, they do this similar kind of a so-called argument that they are trying to make the other person think the same way they do. So these are the underlying messages that the methods are interested in. So the methods I'm using are narrative analysis and discourse analysis. Narrative analysis is based on the idea that the whole cultural reality is a big storyline, and the way we are speaking, we are always telling stories. People usually think, when they think about stories, they think about, for example, like Cinderella or some sort of entertaining story. But actually, every time we are communicating, we are telling little bits, like little storylines. Like this presentation has a story, structure of a story. So similar kind of way conversations have a structure of a story. So narrative analysis looks into these constructions. Who is the villain? Who is the hero, so-called hero, and what are the stages and contexts that these stories take place in? And narrative analysis is more interested about the actual content than the discourse analysis, which is the second method I'm using. Discourse analysis, they are very similar with narrative analysis, sometimes used almost as synonyms. But actually discourse analysis is more interested about the hidden factors of the storylines. What kind of strategies are taken in the structures of language. And it's not so much on what people actually say, but more on how they say it. Additionally, discourse analysis doesn't provide any tangible answers to given problems. So, for example, in my field of studies, when I'm studying built environments, I cannot give recommendations on how buildings should be built, but I can give you kind of like these presentations on the processes. I can open up how people have come to this conclusion with discourse analysis. So it's more about studying processes than actual content as such. So in this last part, I will present how I have applied these methods. I have 5 cases in my dissertation, and I have studied both. I have studied with both methods, with discourse analysis and narrative analysis. My dissertation is about the methods, so it has a methodological questions, but it also is interested about the content of the cases, of course, otherwise it would be useless. So I have the methodological questions, how could the methods be used in workplace management, and how would workplace management research benefit from this kind of studies. So, why is this important? What is the main message I want to give? And the first thing is that because language is such a little research area in the domain of built environment, it should just it should be researched just for the sake of it. And also, I think it's important because linguistic structures are connected to workplaces in such a profound way that they shouldn't be overlooked, because it's not just the thing we can see, it's also the things that has happened before and who has talked to who and how they have talked to each other. And I think by researching these kind of things could make these social constructions visible also to the researchers, to the management, and also to the designers. And questioning these kind of ideas and self-evident facts would kind of like give space to new ideas in managing, in researching, and also in using spaces. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Any questions?